Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here with another Friday Reads. This was a transition week, finishing one book in print and starting another, and also finishing one audiobook and starting another. So today I'm here to tell you about 3 excellent novels and 1 memoir. First up, I just finished reading The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. I've been saving this one to read in winter. It took me a while. I gave it to my husband back in 2019. He read it right away and put it on my side of the shelf, and it's been there ever since. But I'm so glad I finally got to it. And we had an especially cold and more snowy than usual January here in Delaware. So this was the perfect January vibe. This is a creepy supernatural thriller with lots of secrets and twists and turns. It takes place in 2 different timelines. The beginning of the story is in 1908, and it is presented as pages from the diary of a woman named Sarah. They've been published. Her diary's been published by her niece, Amelia. And so there's a little introduction from Amelia, and then we get into the pages of Sarah's actual diary. Sarah experienced some unusual things. So this whole book takes place in the small rural town of West Hall, Vermont, hence the wintry atmosphere here. Now, throughout the years, there have been legends and stories about strange goings-on, especially at the isolated farmhouse on the edge of town and the woods behind it. So we first get Sarah's story through her diary pages from 1908. And in the diary, she is thinking back to her childhood, where she grew up on the farm, and where after her mother died, a Native American woman who she called Auntie all her life comes to take care of her and her father. She lives in a cabin in the nearby woods, and Auntie teaches Sarah all about nature and some things that are a bit unnatural. So we get this story from Sarah's perspective. She's writing, looking back on her childhood from 1908. But in 1908, she is a mother, and her own daughter, Gertie, has gone missing. I think Gertie's only about 5 or 6, so she's gone missing. So that's where that part of the story begins. And then we switch over to modern day, and we hear from Ruthie, a 19-year-old young woman who lives in that same farmhouse at the edge of town, along with her mother. Her father died of a heart attack recently, and her little sister, Fawn. So Ruthie's 19, Fawn is only, I think, 6. And their mother's always been very back to the earth kind of, sort of modern day hippie. So they don't have computers or cell phones. Their mom likes to live in a very old school way, growing their own food. She sells eggs, and she's a very good knitter. She sells knitwear in town at the farmer's market. So anyway, Ruthie is not all that thrilled. At 19, she's ready to get out of town. And she's got a boyfriend named Buzz. But one day, Ruthie comes back very late at night. She's been out with Buzz. And in the morning, she realizes her mother is missing. So we start to find out that over the years, there have been a lot of mysterious disappearances in and around the town of West Hall. And so Ruthie and her little sister Fawn begin looking for their mother. And in their search of the house, they find a copy of Sarah's old diary hidden under the floorboards in their mom's bedroom. So Ruthie is reading about Sarah's story at the same time that she and Fawn are searching for their missing mother. So there are a lot of parallels here between what happened in 1908 and what's happening in the modern day. A lot of secrets wrapped up in that old 1908 story that are affecting Ruthie and Fawn today. This was a super creepy, very suspenseful, very wintry novel that I really enjoyed. I was completely engrossed in this story. I couldn't wait to find out what would happen. And there are a lot of twists and turns and a lot of surprises. So this was just a perfect January read for me. The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. I do have some questions. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens here. I just found out, like I said, this has been on my shelf for years. That's why I read it. But I just found out that Kat of Kat's Novel Adventures, that this was her first read-along book for her book club for January and February. So I'm going to go and check out the discussion there because I do have a few questions. But pretty much things are wrapped up in those last few pages, which I just read last night. Yeah, just still trying to fit all the threads of the story together in my mind. So I have a buddy read starting in early February, but in the meantime, I thought I could fit in a quick YA graphic novel, Lunar New Year Love Story. So this was published last year. Yesterday was Lunar New Year, so this seemed like the perfect time for me to read this. I meant to do this last year and missed it. This is written by Gene Luen Yang, and I've enjoyed his books in the past, and illustrated by, I'm probably going to say this wrong. I meant to look it up before I got on the video. Liuan Pham. And I've read some of her graphic novels in the past as well. So I only just started this morning. I had a doctor's appointment and the wait times were very short. So I only got about 20 pages in, but it's good so far. The very beginning introduces us to the main character. Her name is Valentina, and we find out that she has been obsessed with Valentine's Day since she was a little girl. And she thinks her parents named her after Valentine's Day. She loves everything about the holiday. She's just obsessed with it. Where I am now, she's only 14, so I don't know what's coming next. But clearly, there's a love story coming, YA romance. But I'm very intrigued by the setting and the characters. Like I said, I've had good experience with both of these authors before, so I'm looking forward to reading more of this. On audio, I have just finished 2 Degrees by Alan Gratz earlier this week. Alan Gratz is well known for his middle grade historical fiction. Well, this is a modern day middle grade novel, but along the same lines as his historical fiction in terms of making things relatable to how children experience something, middle grade age kids. So the 2 degrees of the title refers to the 2 degrees centigrade temperature change that we are trying to avoid with climate change, and about the disasters that are already occurring because of these changes on Earth. So we get the stories of 3 different kids in 3 different places, all experiencing climate-related disasters or who are in peril because of climate change. So we start with Akira. She and her father, she lives in California with her parents and her little sister. She and her father are out horseback riding in the Sierra Nevada mountains, something they do frequently, and they see a wildfire off in the distance. However, very quickly, they can see it all around them, and it starts to surround them. While out there riding horseback, they run into another father and daughter who don't live in the area and aren't familiar with the area, who are out taking a hike. So they team up with that father and daughter and try to escape the wildfire, which is quickly surrounding them. And very early in the story, the girls get separated from their fathers. So it's the girls on their own trying to survive a horrible wildfire. This is, of course, ripped from the headlines right now with everything we've seen from California in the last month or so. All those horrifying videos we've seen on the news. So all very, very relevant and very relatable. Then the story moves back and forth between these three stories over and over again. So you get a little bit of each story and get to know the characters. Up in Canada, in Churchill, Manitoba, we meet Owen and George. They're best friends, and they're very used to seeing polar bears around town. This is where the polar bears hang out. But they're seeing changes in the polar bears' behavior due to climate change. The polar bears need ice on the Hudson Bay in order to hunt for seals and survive. And the period when the ice is melted is lasting longer and longer every year. And Owen and George know about this, but they've never thought much about what that means until one day they are out on their own in a snowmobile heading to George's family's cabin for the weekend when they encounter polar bears. Polar bears that are really hungry and desperate because the melt has lasted so long. And then we move down to Florida, to Miami, where we meet Natalie, who lives with her mom in a small one-story house. There is a hurricane coming their way, and on the news they're saying that people should evacuate, but they can't evacuate. They and most of their neighbors can't afford to evacuate. They don't have the money for that much gas. They don't have the money for hotels to stay in. So as they've done with storms past, they stay put. They board up the windows. They get ready for the storm. However, as Natalie's favorite weather person, she's very into weather and climate, actually, because she's lived through so many hurricanes already in her young life. Her favorite weather person announces on TV that this is not like any ordinary hurricane. This is the big one. The Category 5 headed straight for Miami in a way they've never experienced before. So even though Natalie and her mom are prepared as best they can, still, when the storm surge comes, it is way more than they ever expected. The back wall of their house collapses, and Natalie is washed out of the house and into the storm. So we've got three different climate-related situations where there are kids on their own whose lives are in peril directly because of climate change. And as the novel rotates through these three different stories, the tension and the suspense are ratcheted up. This is a very tense novel. In fact, it's a middle grade novel, and it's excellent on audio with different narrators for the different kids. You know, I would still not recommend it for younger middle graders or middle graders who are dealing with a lot of anxiety around climate change, because this is pretty scary, because it's real. So yeah, I would say older middle graders, teens. I mean, I enjoyed the book. I thought it was excellent, very well done, lots of suspense. I loved the clever way that these three stories kind of came together at the end. And yes, it is middle grade. All of the children featured are okay in the end. So that's 2 Degrees by Alan Gratz. And while I was listening to that, I got a message from Libby that one of my audiobook requests was ready. I normally only request books from the library if I need them for book group or some specific reason like that. But recently, I'm using Libby more. And while I was listening to the Book Cougars podcast, one of my favorites, hosted by two friends of mine, Emily and Chris, I started just requesting books on Libby that they were talking about. And I knew most of these books were very popular and had long wait times, so I just put a bunch in. So already I was quite surprised. One came available already, and that is Between Two Kingdoms by Sulika Zawad. So I've been hearing about this book for several years. I think it was Emily on the podcast who was talking about it. It is about it's a memoir about her experience with a horrible illness, a form of leukemia. So I'm only at the very beginning. I had heard about this in many different ways in the past couple of years because she's married to John Batiste, the musician, who we are big fans of. I love his music. I loved when he was on the Stephen Colbert Show, and then he went out on his own, and he's put out some fabulous albums. If you're not familiar with him, check those out. So I knew this author is his wife. And for instance, I knew he had gone on a hiatus for his wife's medical needs, but I didn't know the whole story. So that's what this is. And she starts long before she ever met John, back when she was in college. So some of her bizarre symptoms began when she was a freshman in college. Where I am in the book now, which isn't all that far in, she's, I think, like around 26, and she still doesn't have a diagnosis. And things are getting much worse. She's been struggling with fatigue since her early days in college, plus all these weird things like a rash on her legs that won't go away, and some other things. So she's living in Paris when she finally seeks medical help. Well, she sought medical help for the rash, and nobody helped her really at all, which is frustrating, horrifying, and all too realistic. I mean, I know this from my own experiences with chronic illness, which is one reason I was interested to listen to this book. She narrates it herself. Like I said, I'm not very far into it, but it's a very compelling story so far. And I can't wait to listen to the rest of it and hear the rest of this fascinating, horrifying story that I know does have a good ending. She is in remission now. That's Between Two Kingdoms by Sulika Zawad. So that's everything that I've been reading this week as I transition from January to February and in between old and new print books and audiobooks. I would love to hear what you're reading this week. Please let me know in the comments down below.